But we want to focus this show on the crisis in Ukraine. How close are we really to war? Are we really even near the brink? Or is this perhaps just a ploy by Putin? And if so, what's his endgame? In this half hour, we hope to answer some of your questions about this standoff. And we begin with ABC senior foreign correspondent Ian Pannell with an in-depth look from the ground on where things stand.
Here along the front lines of the Ukraine-Russia crisis, the air can seem as quiet as it is cold.
Although there's supposed to be a ceasefire, this fighting has really never stopped.
But the Ukrainian troops deployed here say they're under constant threat. This shell-shocked factory, riddled with bullets and shrapnel, bearing witness to an 8-year struggle between the Ukrainian military and Russian-backed separatists. Suddenly, our interview with Lieutenant General Alexander Pavlyuk is broken by gunfire.
Empire, it can't be an empire.
Don't know whether you heard that there. We just heard a gunshot. Well, that's the reality of what this ceasefire actually looks like.
General Pavlyuk has been fighting since 2014. He commands 50,000 troops here, and now he says concerns that Russia could soon invade are at an all-time high.
Does it feel that there is a greater threat today than at any time recently?
We are waiting, and we're waiting calmly. If they come, we'll fight.
Over the past month, Russia's military presence along the border to the east has grown to over an estimated 100,000 troops. The Russian Defense Ministry releasing footage showing their forces practicing what they say are merely drills.
Mr. Putin doesn't think Ukraine is the sovereign country, and yet Ukraine is moving gradually and inexorably towards Europe, and he wants to stop that.
President Putin says he doesn't plan to invade, he doesn't plan to attack.
First of all, what Putin says is never the truth. The force they've created is large, powerful, but it is not enough to seize Ukraine. We have people who are ready to fight and will fight. If we will be given the weapons, the help that we need, I think Putin will give up his ideas.
The US has stepped up its support. This 79-ton shipment of weapons and ammunition to the Ukrainian government landing only last night meant to send a signal of support, but also a message of deterrence to the Kremlin. In an exclusive interview with Christian Kevin, the acting US ambassador to Ukraine, she tells us that Russia could do anything at any time.
The Ukrainian government has asked us for this assistance, and they have in fact told us what it is that they need to defend themselves, and that's what we're providing. So, you know, Russia can like it or dislike it, but ultimately it's the decision of Ukraine.
And the Pentagon announcing that 8,500 US troops have been placed on heightened alert, preparing for deployment orders, although no final decisions have been made.
What would lead to that is what's going to happen, what Putin does or doesn't do. And I may be moving some of those troops in the nearer term, just because it takes time. If he were to move in with all those forces, it would be the largest invasion since World War II. It would change the world.
However, Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba telling ABC News the number of Russian troops massed at the border is currently insufficient for a full-scale offensive. Even so, US diplomats' families have been ordered to evacuate the country, and US citizens advised to leave Ukraine after a do-not-travel advisory was issued. But as NATO defences stiffen, these kinds of threats are just part of everyday life for so many Ukrainians, like Alexei and his librarian wife Svetlana, who we met in eastern Ukraine last month.
Have you had this conversation? What will you do as a family if, God forbid, the Russians cross the border and come here?
It's really difficult to plan because you don't know what to expect.
The posters on the library wall giving advice on how to identify landmines and grenades and what to do if shelling starts.
Do people talk about the Russians being on the border? Are people concerned?
I would say no.
During the decades-long Cold War, America and its allies engaged in a global push and pull with the Soviet Union. But after the 1991 dissolution of the USSR, 14 republics no longer under Russian control declared independence, and NATO began engaging with some of them. Ukraine, with its historical and cultural ties to Moscow, seemed an uneasy bedfellow with a Western-leaning alliance. Many Russians, including Vladimir Putin, still feel a deep connection to the country it's been tied to since the 9th century. Putin writing back in July that Russians and Ukrainians are one people, a single whole. Ukraine never became a member of NATO, but the alliance in 2008 opened the door to it. Then came 2014, when everything changed, Ukraine toppling its pro-Russian president. Protesters swarming the capital Kiev in an uprising known as the Revolution of Dignity, or the Maidan Revolution.
We are not terrorists, we are free people that want to live in a good country without corruption, with good laws, with good standards of living.
The president was accused of corruption and trying to turn the country closer to Putin's Russia. Ukraine was torn between protesters who said they wanted to become a modern European democracy and security forces, leading to months of violent clashes that left over 100 people dead and the president ousted.
We have only one finish. We must to win, and we must to build our new country, which will be a part of civilized world.
But in a swift retaliation, Russian forces invaded and annexed the Crimean Peninsula from Ukraine and backed separatists in the east. Although a 2015 peace agreement ended large-scale fighting, the deadly conflict has smouldered and crackled on. And the underlying tensions between America and NATO on the one hand and Russia on the other have slowly built ever since.
The actions that the Russians took in 2014 were the first time that an armed force from one country invaded another country to change those borders since the Nazis invaded to start World War II.
Today, the Ukrainian army is much better equipped to fight back. But still, here on the front line in Avdiivka, soldiers like Ivan are forced to make the most of rudimentary resources like this periscope.
It's Soviet Union times optics, but now it's still working good.
Old-fashioned technology.
Yeah, old technology. Yeah.
If you and I were not stood down in this bunker, if we stood up there, what would happen?
Probably we will be killed by sniper, because
it's that serious, that
yeah,
close.
Yeah.
But the troops here say they have their nation behind them and are ready to fight to the death, knowing that if Putin really intends to cross the border, they face overwhelming odds.
And Ian joins us now. Ian, thanks so much for that comprehensive look at exactly where things stand. The Kremlin had insisted that it needed written responses to its demands that Ukraine would never join NATO. And tonight we're learning that the U.S. ambassador to Moscow delivered America's official response. Tell us what it said.
Yeah, that's right. The ambassador visited, handed over this written response, this letter, if you want to call it that, and left again without saying anything to waiting cameras. Secretary of State Blinken addressed the press. He didn't want to go into too much detail about exactly what the letter says, but I think on the specifics we're getting a pretty clear idea. He's saying that perhaps there is some kind of common ground, some kind of arrangement that can be done, for example, on missile treaties or the conduct of military exercises, training exercises, which has been something that the Kremlin has objected to taking place so close to its borders that perhaps they could coordinate. But I think crucially, on that key point that Moscow has been repeating ever since this crisis really escalated weeks and months ago, this point that it wanted firm security guarantees that Ukraine would never join NATO, Secretary of State Blinken making it clear that in this letter it will not give those guarantees. So the question now is, what is it that Vladimir Putin really wants? If all that he wants at the end of the day is this firm guarantee, then it's hard to see how there is a diplomatic resolution to this. However, if this whole exercise has been something of a feint to try and extract concessions from Europe, from NATO, from the United States that otherwise it wasn't really offering, then perhaps there is something that can be done. Worth adding, of course, that these talks have been taking place in Paris. This doesn't involve the United States. It's France, Germany, Ukraine and Russia. They've agreed to meet again in 2 weeks, which again suggests that diplomacy certainly isn't dead, but we're awaiting that official response from the Kremlin, which certainly could come in a matter of days. Lindsay?
But bottom line, the U.S. not willing to give those assurances that it seems that Putin wants. Ian, thank you once again.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.